It's loading. Online.
All right, perfect. Hello, welcome. My name is Frederik van Deurs. I am the CEO of Green Innovation Group, and I've been asked to come here and moderate this excellent event hosted by Volt. The Volt initiative is an initiative that really excites me, as I work every day with green innovation and green consultancy and providing strategies and conducting strategies for major corporates and private organizations. Of course, a pan-European initiative is something that I can definitely welcome. So that's why I'm really excited to be here today. We have a whole range of really interesting speakers that are going to discuss the future economy and the concept for the future economy, and I'm really excited about it. So a short introduction about myself. I'm an anthropologist by education. I was born and raised in Denmark. So I grew up in a very united Europe, you could say, born in '88. What has really sparked my curiosity to work with the circular economy, with the green transition, is that I was in 2015 looking at the business cases around circular economy, and I was just really curious about the fact that companies and public organizations would have to pay huge amounts of money to get rid of something that other organizations could use to create more value. And that just baffled me. It was kind of like you know, when you're looking at a puzzle and it seems like there's half of the pieces missing, and you're like, but those pieces are lying right next to the table. How come you don't take those pieces and put them into the puzzle? So that's why we started Green Innovation Group, where we have mapped more than 12,000 green innovations. They are all based in business. So another thing that also came to mind was the dichotomy between doing something that's great for the environment that can also be great business. And I think that's one of the key components in what is going to drive Europe forward, what is going to drive the competitiveness of Europe, is that we manage to turn the green transition into a lot of business opportunities. So that's what I spend every day of my life working towards. And the reason why I do that is because the objective is pretty clear in front of us. We must reach drawdown. In order to reach drawdown, we will need cooperation. The funny thing is that greenhouse gases do not care about nationalities. They do not care about national borders at all. So we must reduce the emissions. We must make absolutely certain that we can drive great business models upon reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. If we do not do that, it will have catastrophic consequences. And I believe that all of us that are in this room are quite aware of those consequences. If we weren't, we wouldn't be here discussing the potentials of a circular economy. However, it does seem that it is very hard for us to grasp just how far we are away from the targets. So it came to show that Denmark has continuously been nominated as the greenest country in the world. So hooray, Denmark. However, if all of the major listed companies in Denmark reach their sustainability targets that they have in their strategies, if all of them reach their targets, we are still on a 3-degree temperature rise trajectory. And this is if they reach their targets, mind you. Denmark is doing slightly better than Germany, and Germany is on the same path. So we do have a lot of work to do. And it's even more work than what it looks like in the fancy sustainability strategies and goals that are coming out. In 2008, I was working in the development aid sector. I was fundraising for an organization called Oxfam that some of you may be familiar with. And we were working with the 2015 goals that, lo and behold, became the 2030 goals. So setting targets is definitely not enough. We need concrete action. And we do need to be quite ready for a future that is radically different from the one that we're in right now. We're going to see a massive digitalization that has recently come into perspective. It took a lot of good really bright minds by surprise how adaptable we were to transition into a digital economy during the COVID pandemic. So I believe that we have a lot of sample cases that we can look at, that we can take inspiration from, and that can also help us understand that change is indeed possible. We do not have to do what we did yesterday to solve the problems of tomorrow. And to me, that's a really inspiring mission. And that's also why I'm really looking forward to this debate, and also why I'm here and why I go to work every day. So that was a short introduction to me and to my company, Green Innovation Group. I'd love to talk to any of you if you're interested in strategies for the green transition, but I'll also leave it at that. So first off, I'll let the speakers introduce themselves. We have agreed on a 2-minute introduction of each and every one. I exceeded that a little bit as the host. I'm allowed to, so I got a bit extra time. But first up, we have Charlotte Östermann. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. As a fellow Scandi, I should, but I'm just really in doubt as how to throw in the swagger in that name. Charlotte is from Sweden and working as a sustainable development director at Pax Techum Global Consultancy. So I'm looking very much forward to learning what you have to say, Charlotte. Please unmute.
Thank you. No problems about butchering my name. I actually don't live in Sweden anymore, so I get it butchered every day in between the countries that I work in. But that's absolutely fine. And wow, what an interesting introduction, that we shouldn't be doing things that we've been doing the years before to the problems that we got now. I fully agree. A little bit about me. I'll keep it very brief because I heard that I could use 3 minutes in total, so I'll put the clock on as well. But really, I'm an accredited practitioner of social value and SROI, so social return on investment. And in my 2 roles, I work with organizations that help understand how they can be accounting for a wider definition of value. So way further than what would be just financial value. And really, what we're seeing today in the world is a system that we can see quite broken. There's an inequality that is rising. One of the studies from Oxfam that you were talking about as well in the introduction really shows that the inequality in every country of the world is currently on the rise. And why? Because the system is broken. We've been, in the view of Social Value International, which is one of the organizations I work with, is that we've been too focused on financial value, and we need to expand that definition. And we need to expand our definition of value to really include the stakeholders and the people who are being affected by our organizations, for better and for worse. So how do we do that? Instead of just talking about me, I wanted to give you a few leads on what we're working with as SROI practitioners. So really, when we want to define value and what we call social value, so that's under what goes under sustainable development, sustainability as well. Social value is really that quantification of importance of the changes that people place on the changes they experience in their lives. So really, if we have an organization, it could be a charity, it could be a company, it could be a political party, it could be whatever type of organization we've got. That organization will create and destroy value. It will have changes on people's well-being, and these changes are called outcomes. So really, if we want to understand what is social value for people, we need to go there. We need to talk to them. We need to involve our stakeholders to really understand what changes, because the changes will be positive, negative, unintended, and intended. So that's where the principles of social value comes in. So you got that in the circle. I won't go through them all, but I want you to know that this is not a framework. It's principles. It can help you with whatever measurement approach you go down. But it helps you maximize the value that you're generating in a more holistic way with the resources that you got available. And then it builds in accountability and responsiveness to those people affected. And that's really important. So my last 10 seconds, main takeaway and what angle I'm coming in from this is that to change the system we got in place, we need to expand what we call value. And then we need to build responsiveness into our systems. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Pardon. So next up, we have Riccardo. And I think Mastini, I can do that one. He's a PhD candidate in ecological economics and political ecology. Riccardo, you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself. Take it away, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very glad to be here with you tonight. And I am a PhD researcher at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and I work on political ecology. And for my research, I look into post-growth economic theories and their possible interaction with political discourses, such as the Green New Deal. So I'm very excited to be here tonight because it's one of the few occasions where I have the opportunity of discussing both my favorite topics at once. Before getting into academia, I was working as a campaigner at Friends of the Earth Europe, and I was involved with organizing the Post-Growth Conference at the European Parliament in 2018, where a wide coalition of trade unions, think tanks, NGOs, and members of the political parties across political groups came together on in a 2-day conference to discuss the various facets of this very fascinating debate. So the good news is that these discourses, these debates that were just a fringe, at the fringe of the political discourse just a few years ago, are increasingly becoming if not hegemonic, at least they vie for policymakers' attentions. I'm also an expert reviewer for the IPCC 6th Assessment Report, which is due for publication in 2022. And the good news is that the IPCC is including some modeling looking at a post-growth society. So drawdown and all other climate strategies interacting with a transformation in economic paradigm. So I'm very excited also to work with the IPCC on this. I will just say a word on the fact that I think that bringing together people from different backgrounds, such as we are, so from business, academia, think tanks, is very important because we all bring different perspectives. So I look forward to discussing with you today. Thank you.
Excellent, Riccardo. Thank you so much for that introduction, and sounds really exciting with the IPCC work. We've recently done a framework that is combining the observations in the IPCC, the 2014 and 15 IPCC report, with the global investment framework by MSCI called GICS, Global Industrial Classification System, in order to make greenhouse gas emission reductions an investable asset. This doesn't quite file into a post-growth economy, but it is really interesting, quite comprehensive work they're doing in the IPCC. Heiner Flassbeck, please join us
thank you.
with a 2-minute introduction. You're an economist and quite a public voice. So for all of us that are not familiar with your work, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I don't want to say too much of myself because that would take a lot of time because I'm rather old in this group. So I don't want to repeat my life here. I'm an economist. I've been in many assignments all around the world, including UN and so on. So the point we're talking about is, as I understood, is growth, and the question how we can shift to a different way of growth or different way of development. I do not like the word growth that much because it's nothing is about simple growth in terms of repeating things that we have done before. What the world is about is change, is structural adjustment. And the question is how we can go into a direction of structural adjustment that would bring about the climate targets that we all have in mind. Here I have to say we have not yet started with that process, unfortunately. We have Paris, but Paris is a target. And one colleague said before, there are targets and many targets around, but there is no way, there is no instrument. And what we need is a global instrument in a global way to change the overall situation. And if we do not find that, if we do not talk about that, we're talking about nothing. And this is unfortunately what happens. Many people all around the world are doing nice things, but small things. They're on the micro processes. They're moving things here and there and finance and what do I know. But the real thing is, what are we doing with the fossil fuels, with fossil energy, and how do we treat that? Just let me give you a simple example. Yesterday or day before yesterday, a billionaire flew into the space using I don't know how many tons of CO2. And in my country, at least in Germany, was not even a discussion about that. Nobody asked the question, so why is this idiot flying into space and using millions of tons, which could have been used by, say, 1 million Indians for the next 10 years? Nobody asking this question. Why is nobody asking this question? Isn't that funny? Our news are all bringing this wonderful news, Mr. Branson in space and so, and they're all celebrating him. I'm not celebrating at all. It was a disaster. It was a disaster for all our attempts to reduce our ecological climate footprint. And this is exactly what it's all about. We're talking about for 30, more than, or 50 years, as I said, I'm an old man. For 50 years, we're talking about ecology, we're talking about climate. But you know, what is the real oil price? The real price of oil, the price of oil in relation to our income. Do you know that? Nobody's talking about that. Why not? This is the most important price in the whole world. Nobody talks about it. I tell you, the real oil price today is as low as in the beginning of the 70s of the last century, of the 70s, which means that is before all the oil price explosions and the things that we have seen since then. It's the lowest price ever that we have, and the lowest price you can imagine. And so people are using oil and coal because it costs nothing. It costs absolutely nothing. And nobody's discussing that. Now we have, in Germany, we have elections ahead, but even the Greens are not discussing it seriously. They fear to say, oh boy, it could be a bit more expensive to drive a car or flying around the world. They fear to say that, but as long as we fear to address these things, to address the simple question, what is the process that the world, the global community, so to say, needs to keep oil and coal and gas inside the earth, under the ground? That is what we have to talk about. What is the process that we need to keep it where it is and not to dig it up? And if we don't talk about this, we're talking about nothing. All the rest is blah, blah. Sorry to say that very frankly, but it's blah, blah. There's a lot of blah, blah around in this world. But the real question is, how do we keep it under the soil, and how can we avoid that it is coming up? As soon as something is mined and is coming up, it will be used. This is market economy. It will be used. If we don't use it here in our wonderful, highly industrialized countries, it will be used elsewhere in the world. And we have no connection with the rest of the world, really, to produce a process where everybody on this earth has to economize on the fossil fuels. We don't have that process. And as long as we don't have that process, we have nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Heiner. That was a great wake-up call for all of us, I believe. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of talking about the relative cost of things, and that's also one of the things Charlotte was touching upon in her brief presentation, that we need to reassess what value actually entails and what it means, and reconceptualize what value is and what is a cost, and actually have an economy that is based on true costs and a more holistic way of viewing what cost is, besides the monetary system. So thanks a lot for that view. And I think the closest I have heard someone in popular debate approach this is when Bill Gates is discussing the green premium, which is a concept that he coins as the difference you have to pay right now for a green alternative to a black solution. So the cost difference between those two that are quality and quantity comparable, the price difference is what he's coining as the green premium. and sets out a target that we need to bring the green premium down, which is also a very important link in the mission to actually make it there. And Heiner, I wrote you privately and asked for sources for those relative oil prices. I think it would be really great to have those at hand so we can spread that message. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Rebecca Müller, last but not least, you actually asked to be introduced last, so here you are. The floor is all yours. Please tell us about yourself.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I thought, because I'm apparently the only one who's actually a party member of Volt, so it's also nice to let the guests speak first, right? Yeah, well, my name is Rebecca Müller. I'm the lead candidate at Volt Germany for this year's national elections that also Heiner brought just up. And I do actually have a background in business. I've worked in different industries, also in startup and in consultancy for 7 years. But since end of last year, I actually quit my job to be full-time candidate and also volunteering at Volt, which I joined in 2019. So, and since then, I worked mainly here at the local level in Cologne, because I'm also the city lead here in Cologne, which is, as the name already translates, it's we are a team of 4 leading the local city team. And I think due to my business background, it always felt a little bit strange back then in university when we had those macroeconomic models that came up with infinite growth, whereas we have finite resources. And actually that never matched for me. It was still an open question when I left university. And I worked, as I said, quite some years in different industries, however, never found a good answer for that question. And then, I found Volt. So, and actually giving me at least an answer, because as you already mentioned, I think you were, Frederik, you mentioned it, our 21st century's challenges, especially the climate crisis, is a problem or challenge that is not stopping at national borders. That is not only a European problem, but it's definitely a global problem. But from my perspective, we have to start on a European level, find solutions for that problem. And I can definitely quote you all here, concrete measures, how to get there, how to reach our targets that we obviously have. However, also, I do personally miss political solutions, how to get there. So I'm very excited to discuss with you what political and also economical solutions there might be. We do have some in our package, in our manifesto. However, it's always great to pinpoint those with so many experts as we have today.
And it just took this boomer a minute to find the unmute button. Thanks a lot, Rebecca, for that introduction. And I definitely agree to the point that we do need to collaborate cross borders, and I think it's about time that someone comes up with a pan-European concept that can go beyond borders, especially in a European context. It seems so obvious. So when I was introduced to the concept, I was instantly showing my support for it. But we've spoken a lot about this concept of infinite growth with finite resources, and that's of course also the key concept that we are going into now. But when we're talking about that, I think it's important for us to have a look at some of the mega trends that are going on. So I'm going to try and set the stage a little bit. During the pandemic, we have seen that digitalization is definitely a trend that cannot be ignored, even though it has been mostly hyped, but not really deployed and developed for a very long time. At the same time, we're also seeing that the labor market is changing quite drastically. As we are seeing a shift in the legal entities that are companies and corporates, we're also seeing what some is referencing to as the gig economy, we're seeing automation, and we're seeing labor that is not unionized, that is not protected by the common labor laws, but is masquerading as self-employment. And this goes for, you could say, the Ubers of the world, but during this pandemic, we have also seen it with the ones that are doing the tests, the PCR tests and the quick tests. And on top of that, we've seen it with the ones doing the vaccinations. We have even seen it with medical professionals that turn into freelancers in order to do online consultations, in order to approve vaccines. At least that's been a trend here in Denmark. I'm actually calling from Sweden, so that just shows how international this region actually is. But when we're looking at all of these things at large, we're having digitalization. We're seeing that remote work is becoming more and more of an option, right? I'm making this call as a business professional from Sweden whilst paying my income taxes in Denmark. I might as well have been in Bali. So there's also a point for discussion in how are we going to contain the income tax system that right now the entire system of nation states is based upon. We have seen recently in the EU context how major data companies have been fined and taxated, especially from the competition commissioner, my fellow Dane, Margrethe Vestager, has been pretty active there. So we see that automation and the future of the labor market also plays a huge role here. So if now I'm going to give the floor to you guys, and please raise your hand in the Zoom function if you want to chip in, or raise your actual hand if you want to chip in. I can also see those. But when we're looking at the transition from growth capitalism, and we're looking to transition into a circular economy, what is it that is so difficult? And I know this is a major question, but Heiner, if you were to give your...
That is exactly what I would like to talk about. Why is it so difficult? Well, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult because we're intertwined with this system of fossil fuels for 200 years. Let's not fool ourselves. The whole development, the whole industrial development that we have seen, the whole increase in living standards, and they have increased, there is no doubt about it. They have dramatically increased. All this increase is definitely connected to the use of fossil fuels. No doubt about it. So, and this has to be changed. I do not say it cannot be changed, it can be changed, but it takes a long time and we have to start immediately. And this is the crucial thing. What we need rising prices. I tell you, I'm an economist. For economists, the prices are the most important thing. We're talking about market economies. What you need rising prices, real prices. The real price of the fossil fuels has to rise for the next 100 years, which means every year, everybody has to be sure that every year oil, gas, and coal will be more expensive than the year before, say 5% or 10%, whatever you want. It's not about moving the price once up now, as in Germany we discussed now 15 cents on CO2 price and things like that. That is all ridiculous. No, we need much more. We need a transformation that takes a very long time. And this transformation is possible. The market economy is extremely efficient in turning around the system and giving it a different direction. So I would not go for a new economic system, not at all, because we don't have one. It would be ridiculous now to invent, in addition to all the problems that we have, to invent a new economic system. No, we don't have one. We have to use the system that we have. And this system is based on prices. So what we need is a process where the international community, the community of nations, the United Nations, whoever it is, they have to come together and they have to define this long increase of prices in cooperation with those countries and those producers of the fossil fuels. They have to be on board because they are the ones who have to contain the supply of these fossil fuels. And only if the supply is contained, we can have this price increase for say 50, 100 years. And then the system will definitely change. I cannot. I have just written a book about your main question: is there on a limited planet? Is there unlimited growth possible? Well, that's a very open question. But if it is not growth, what is possible is definitely development. What this development means is a very open question. We do not know. Maybe in our countries, for the majority of the people, there will not be a huge increase of living standards in the next 100 years, maybe. But for the countries, for the developing countries, definitely need that, because they will never opt for a cooperation with the industrial countries if they do not have the chance to increase their standard of living in the next 100 years. So we have to see that all in the framework of democracy, because I think nobody of us wants a green dictatorship. So, but if we are there, we need cooperation in a way that we have not seen before. And then there are two ingredients. I stop in a minute, but let me say the two ingredients that are extremely important to make this democratically viable, to make people to vote for such a process, is that at the first round that we avoid that this huge structural change that is coming on all our societies will lead to unemployment. You mentioned it already. If we are not able to avoid unemployment, then it will be all in vain. And this is the big fear. So the whole system can explode in the one way, that can explode for ecological reasons, but it can also explode for economic reasons if we're not able to contain unemployment and bring people, give people and keep for people the chance to at least keep the living standards in our societies and to increase the living standards in other societies. So this is the one ingredient to avoid unemployment. But I tell you, in Europe, we're not good about that. We're not good about it at all. In the last 10 years, after the financial crisis, 2008-9, we were not able to reduce unemployment in Europe to a degree that was reasonable. In Germany, we did, but for Germany, because it went for beggar thy neighbor policy in the monetary union by wage dumping. I do not want to go into that. But for Europe as a whole, there was nothing. France has still very high unemployment. Spain has, Italy has high unemployment. We're not good on that because we stick to an economic paradigm that is useless, that is absolutely useless. This called neoliberal or neoclassical economic paradigm. And as long as we do not understand that we have to move forward away from this stupid market-driven paradigm, then there will be no way for the ecological problem to be solved. And let me give the second ingredient, but the second ingredient is even more important. The second ingredient has to do with inequality. If you go for a process where the prices for fossil fuels rise for 50 to 100 years, it is clear that the poorest people have to bear a much bigger burden than the richest people. I mentioned these billionaires already who want to go to the space now, and stupid things like that, who are driving huge yachts in the Mediterranean and whatever. They're doing all these crazy things and nobody cares. This has to be changed. There has to be huge redistribution, a massive redistribution of income to make it viable, the ecological change viable to the poorest people, and to make them vote for such a process. Otherwise, it will never work. So reduce, avoid unemployment, and go for redistribution. This is on no political agenda. Look at the Greens and everywhere is a no political agenda. I do not know the agenda of Volt, but I haven't seen one where it is included.
And Heiner, you're bringing something up here that I find personally quite interesting, which is we've had a paradigm where it's been unethical and sort of not even frowned upon, but a huge taboo to actually assess what is the value of a human life. And during the recent situation with COVID-19, we have been quite faced with making those economic calculations, and nations have been approaching this problem in different ways. And the fact of the matter is that we can actually put a price on the human life. It's a very inconvenient truth, and there is a price, but it's very unpopular to go out and make that assessment, because, as you say, one billionaire can actually emit as much as 100 million people in a developing country without anyone asking the democratic fundamental question: what is your right as a human being?
Yeah.
To which degree do you have access to the finite amount of molecules that we have here on this earth? And I think that's a pretty crucial question to ask, and not one there is an easy solution to. But Rebecca, you have had your hand raised patiently. Please take the floor.
Yes, thanks, Heiner. I think you mentioned some very, very good points, so that we do actually have a problem with the real cost. So basically externalizing most of the cost we have and transferring that to future generations, as well as the global south, as we can call it, I think, in total. But I would say, I mean, what I took from what you just said is that we need, of course, an international agreement on rising prices on fossil fuels. I would also say that we do, at least I feel that way, that we do also have a responsibility in Germany, at least, to make some of the first steps and become, if we manage, become leading in terms of investments in green innovation, as well as investments in infrastructure on renewables. And I think it goes both hand in hand. So I think we definitely need an international agreement, but I think as well that we need to start as soon as possible. We need to start now because time is running. And therefore there are a lot of very concrete opportunities we have already today to do on a very local, on a federal state, but also, of course, also on a national level, as well as on a European level. And I think we have to tackle this challenge from every angle we can. And that includes, as I said, innovation, investments in innovation and sustainable innovation. It includes innovation, investments in infrastructure, and as well as includes a CO2 price tag that we had to put on that.
Thank you, Rebecca. I firmly believe that this concept of the CO2 tax is one that is on everybody's mind. And as someone who's working with innovation and technology, I'm quite often being asked about two major topics that are really coming in hot in the Danish context right now. One is power to X as one concept, where you take green electricity or green energy and turn it into something else. And the other one is carbon capture storage and carbon capture utilization. I'm always disappointing my audiences when I'm being asked these questions, because they're often being positioned as silver bullets that can solve all of our problems at once, which of course they can't. But one is that in terms of carbon capture storage and carbon capture utilization, some companies are now estimating that they can capture a ton of CO2 at the cost of $50. And if you take that amount into account and you factor in the introduction of a €200 carbon tax for emitting 1 ton of CO2, you would wonder why the companies that claim that they're able to capture that gas at a cost of $50 is not interested in introducing a tax of €200, because that would definitely make for an extraordinary business case for them. So that just to me begs the question: why are we still taking those calculations at face value when one hand is saying no to taxes and the other one is presenting a postulate that they're actually able to capture those gases that they don't want to tax on? So I think you're definitely going the right way with the carbon taxes. And as Heiner was also talking about earlier, the market economy has a funny way of fixing things and making them more efficient. And of course, if we do introduce one tariff or one tax, the market economy is going to find a way to adopt to that. So I think there's reason to be fearful, but there's even more reason to be fearful for not making this change. It's a very necessary action, and if we do it in one way or another, I think that's also a great point in just raising the oil prices, which is a different way to the same goal compared to CO2 tax. We're also seeing another topic that I think is pretty interesting for us to touch upon. Charlotte, you raised your hand before. Is that still relevant? Cool. Then I'm going to give the floor to you in a second. I'd like to discuss our diets, as that is actually composing of the majority of the emissions that come from the voters themselves. But before we go into that, Charlotte, whatever was on your mind, please do speak your mind.
Thank you. Really good comments from the others, and I wanted to pick up a little bit around the pricing that Heiner was talking around, and then that we need to hit this from all angles, as Rebecca was saying. But basically, we need to price the externalities, and we kind of know that because we are operating in a system that is financially driven at the moment. Yes, we might not want that for the future, but that's probably steps we need to take. But that goes further than the environmental. And I'll give you an example. I'm well with a lot of economists, so you probably know this a lot better than I do. But if we look at GDP, that tends to be very focused on the cost or the production of a country. The financial accounting, at least from the 3 countries where I tend to spend my time in, yes, you can mention your triple bottom line, that's really great, but when it comes to what's actually being reported in the 50 pages of corporate reports, it tends to be a lot more focused on the financial cost, prices, value that organization has created, and we're not really focusing on the other outcomes. And there's a lot of changes that an organization is creating, the resources that they need, the lives of people that they affect, the value of those people's lives, as you were saying, Frederik. All of that, we need to take that into the account. It's a bit geeky, but it actually needs to come into the accounting from the way I see it, and we need to use that and that information to change the way we make decisions. And I think if we start working with that in collaboration with all the other things you've been mentioning, then we are going to be able to take steps towards the circular economy as well. Well, further steps. There's things happening already.
And what do you see as one of the steps? Now we've talked a lot on a sort of abstract level, but now you're saying steps are already being taken. What are steps that inspire you, Charlotte? Now you work with the private sector in a different way than probably most of the panelists. So, what is a cause for hope for you?
Well, number one, conversations like this. I know we've got a lot of attendees watching this conversation as well. For me, this is inspiration, having other people that sees this a little bit different, but we still want a better world for all. For me, that's inspiration. With the private sector, so in my role with Social Value UK specifically, that's a membership organization. In the UK, we're seeing a real rise in the attention of social value, an organization that really wants to measure this. And we're seeing more and more members that comes to us and ask us practically, what do I do to account for the social value that I'm generating and evidence that? But then more than just telling the story, how do I manage it? How do I build that feedback into what I do? And I find that really exciting. And I've been with our organization, not as a member of employees all the time, but I've been member of the network for the last 5 years. And it's a real difference. There's more companies every year asking these questions. So that's some of the parts where I'm seeing positive developments, even if it's far from what we need, but I'm seeing the signs.
Thanks for sharing that, Charlotte. Heiner, you're marking.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to what Rebecca said about what we're doing in Germany. You know, the other day I had a discussion with the environmental minister, the Minister of Environment in Germany, and you know what happens is very simple. I give my speech in a way that I did it more or less in a short version here. And then she said, "Oh, you see, people. he's right, most probably. But we're doing a lot of things. And she enumerates 20 things or so that they have done in the last 10 years, which are all extremely small. They're so small, if you add it up, it will end with nothing. But this is politics, you know, and that is why there is a trade-off. If you say, let's do all these small things here because it's all very important, let's create awareness and I don't know what, that is all very important. No, there is a trade-off. And the trade-off says, if we do all this and you concentrate on all this, you forget about the big thing. You forget about the big thing. That means for our politicians in particular to go to international conferences to raise their hand and say, Paris is not enough. And that is not happening. You see, it's not happening. They say, oh, Paris was good. We agreed on having targets, but the targets are not met. And if the targets are not met, in the end, everybody says, oh, that was my predecessor. I'm not responsible for that. How can I be taken responsible for what my predecessor did not do? And things like that. It will never happen if we just talk about targets. We have to talk about action, about concrete global action. It has to be global action. It's not enough to be at the European level even. We need global action. And all the small things that we do here, if we concentrate on them, that is taking the attention away from the real thing. And we have not yet started to talk about the real thing. This is what it's all about. So when are we going to start to talk about it? As I said, if we save more energy here and use less fossil fuels, at the moment we have a global market. The less we use, the more others use. That is market economy. That is a very simple process. The price fall if we even tax oil and the price in Germany goes up, the international price will fall. Because we use less, then the international price will fall. What will be the result? The result will be that more oil is used elsewhere in the world. And it will not be, the global targets cannot be met in this way. So it is all, you see, it's all about economics. Everybody's talking about the climate challenge. It's all nice and good. IPCC was mentioned already. But it's all about economics, and it's about an economic process that we create in our minds, a strategy that we create, and that is then implemented, and that is sold to our people. That is where we convince our people, the majority of our people, to stand behind that. And that is the biggest task that you can imagine. It has not yet started, unfortunately, in no party whatsoever in Germany.
Thanks a lot, Heiner, and that's a conversation that I can testify from working in more than 12 countries that is not a conversation that many are having at all, because it is also quite inconvenient, and we will have to radically reimagine how we do things. Riccardo, hearing what you're hearing now about the perspectives and the angles, what does that make you think? You're representing the researcher side of things here. So what comes to mind when you're hearing what's being voiced now?
Well, many things come to mind. And the first one is to try and, I think, throw a wrench into the narrative of, let's say, of the circular economy. In the sense, bearing in mind that all we can attempt to do is to make our economy more circular, but the economy will never be circular because of the second law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be recycled, and also materials have limits on how much we can reuse materials. So we have to bear in mind that as long as our economy is embedded into the biosphere, the tapping into resources and creating waste will always affect the environment. There is so much we can do into, let's say, closing that loop, given the fact that the economic system is an open system. I agree with many of the things that were said. At the same time, I disagree with maybe the nuance that is the emphasis, that is put on some of them. For example, on taxation. I think that while carbon taxation can play a role in the transition, I think it's a marginal role. I think that fossil fuels, given that they are as substantial to our economy, as we were saying. They have, I think, low price, let's say, elasticity, in the sense that it's very difficult, I think, to win our production and our consumption system of fossil fuels simply by sending market prices. I think that we need a stronger emphasis on command and control policies, so on setting efficiency standards, on setting standards on what kind of production is allowed, what types of consumption are allowed. I think that an interesting metaphor that is increasingly being mobilized by climate justice groups is the one of a wartime-like mobilization. So looking at the precedent of situations in which a society were faced with abrupt changes, since the production and consumption needed to be geared, let's say, towards a specific goal, which in that case was, of course, war. And in our case would be the one of, let's say, demobilizing certain factors of production and transforming the way we produce and consume. So I think we need a stronger emphasis on legislation and also on transforming in more direct ways the fashion in which agricultural production is carried out, the kind of industrial production that is allowed or not. Let's be reminded that the only time when emissions fell in line with the climate targets that Paris set out was during the pandemic, in the sense when vast parts of the economy were shut down. And I don't think we can reach the same targets simply through market mechanisms. Also because if we talk about a policy of keep it in the ground, so keep fossil fuels in the ground, I think we need to have a more direct forms of rationing the amount of energy we use. Because I don't think that we can replace the humongous amount of energy that we currently use at the global level with renewable energy. I think that the ecological and social impact of translating, let's say, our current levels of consumption, simply switching the energy source that fuels them, I think it would be detrimental to a broader ecological and social understanding of well-being at the global level. I'll leave it at that, and maybe we can pick up on some of these controversial things I said.
Yeah, you did say something, and I did foreshadow that earlier, that I wanted for us to discuss what we eat and whose responsibility it is. And as citizens in the EU, we are part of a system that is heavily subsidizing and incentivizing quite damaging practices, primarily in agriculture, where we have for many years refined and developed methods for converting energy in an incredibly inefficient way. So by taking plant-based calories and transforming them through animals, we are not only polluting the local environment quite a lot, we're not pushing a demand for high mechanization and fossil fuel consumption in agriculture. We're also actually dividing our caloric output from agricultural practices with a factor of 10. So I think it's worth for us to discuss something that is quite at hand right now, and that is up for negotiation right now in the European Parliament. They're discussing how to do the agricultural subsidy programs within the EU. So maybe it's about time we start discussing who has the right to eat agricultural produce that is made in such an inefficient way, and how come we still support it with our hard-earned tax money. I think that's something that's quite worth discussing. How come we still allow it? Passing the floor to Heiner. I'm sorry.
I don't want to take too much time, but can I briefly respond to Riccardo? Well, yeah, good luck. This is the invention of a new economy, something that has existed before, which was called planned economy. I can only tell you, I did a lot of studies on East German planned economy. It was a plain disaster in any respect, including the environmental one. that you can imagine. But well, we cannot go into that in detail. But the point is you have to find democratic majorities. I mean, maybe you say, no, democracy I'm not interested in. We want the green dictatorship. Well, then we can stop the discussion right here, because that is for me really stupid. But if you say we want democratic majorities, then you have to define a reasonable program, and that cannot consist only of forbidding things and preventing things with a strong government. You see, I said also I would have not allowed Mr. How is it called, this billionaire, to go to the space with his airplane. That is right. These extreme stupid things, Branson. These extreme stupid things have to be prevented by the government. But you cannot regulate everything in that. And the main thing is you cannot regulate development. You see, we're talking about development. We're talking about young people who are developing new things, young people who have to have the incentive to develop good things. And these good things need incentives. And these incentives in our economies are prices and nothing else. These are that is the most important instrument. And it's not the government that regulates here and there and in 1 million places where the government puts his hand on, and then you will see what you will get. You will get resistance. You will get huge resistance from all parts of the society, and that will end your effort very quickly, because you see now, even in Germany, we're not able to build windmills anymore because there is resistance for this good thing. But if you go with a program into the election where you say, oh, we will not allow you to fly to Spain anymore, and to fly to US not at all, and to fly around the world is totally forbidden. If you say, well, we do not want agriculture in the way before, we radically change it. But I don't care about unemployment. Unemployment, you didn't even mention unemployment. I don't care about unemployment. Well, you will see, you will lose. You will get not even 5%. So this is the task. Not just talk about these things in an abstract way, but think about what can be a program that can be attractive even to the majority of the people. And this is what young people have to do, and not just. Sorry to say that, to have fictional ideas about what could be done if we would have an overly competent government, a government that knows everything and can control development of technology and all these things. We don't have it. We will never have it. We have stupid politicians, we have stupid parties, and it will be extremely difficult to steer the whole economy by these politicians. Sorry to say that, but as I said, I'm an old man, I'm allowed to do that.
Thanks, Heiner, for contributing. Charlotte, you were raising your hand before, your actual hand.
Yeah, I'm quite low tech, aren't I? It's fascinating because as soon as someone says something, there's like 5 more points, but I'll stick to the one I was thinking about originally, because it was around who's got the right to eat agriculture products, which I think is a fascinating question, and not one that I prepared for this one. But we all live in countries that got pretty high ecological footprints, and I'm just making the link that we also live in the countries that are the richest ones in the world, and we both get to have a lot of the resources that the world got. Within our countries are generally the 12.4% of people that owns about 80% of the wealth of the world. We're lucky to have that choice, but I think we really need to recognize our personal responsibility as well. Of course, we can't regulate everything. We can't make everyone do exactly what we want, but I do think we all got a role to play in terms of what we choose to do in our lives. And then, of course, also there's negative consequences of eating food that is also quite resource heavy. It's not great to eat hamburgers 7 days a week, and we know that it's not great for our health. So why would we transport that model to other countries? I think it's a good place to start to share share some of our learnings with the other parts of the world as well, instead of putting everyone on the same track.
And thanks a lot for sharing that, Charlotte. And I think curiously also addressing Heiner's point about employment, that in the past 50 years we've seen a huge decrease in employment in the primary sector. So and that's only possible because we've gotten better and better at both extracting fossil fuels but also utilizing them in engines. So right now we're actually cheating quite a lot in the calculations. In order to produce 1 plant calorie, we need 23 fossil calories. So we're trading 23 calories to 1, and then after that we're trading 10 calories for 1 calorie when we convert it through animals. So there's definitely a massive deficiency going on there, where I think it's possible to imagine higher employment rates in the primary sector if we find alternative models that are more labor dependent and also less mechanized, and I think they'll also make for healthier environments, and they'll make for carbon sinks that can be through agroforestry, for instance, that is quite hard to do with mechanized labor and mechanized agriculture the way that we do one-dimensional fields today. But Rebecca, you have raised your hand, so I'm really curious to hear what's on your mind.
Yeah, I can actually add on to what Charles said. So many different points to you would like actually to comment on. However, let's stick to 2 actually. So I wanted to add a little bit on what you said, Heiner, regarding unemployment. Because from my perspective, we do actually have within that transition that we're only starting right now. We do have quite a lot of opportunities in terms of needing educated people, skilled expertise that needs to drive that transition. That's a huge opportunity from my perspective. And of course, we do not have those skilled expertise everywhere we need it yet. However, this is also the reason why we heavily need to invest in education when it comes both into environmental education, but of course also in digital education. And I think, at least from my perspective, I like to put a little bit more constructive or at least positive perspective into the future and like to see it as a chance. And I know, of course, that is very difficult given the development we can see in the past. However, at least from my perspective, I've decided that I feel that this is the only opportunity we've got. So let's try to do and make the best out of it. And on the other hand, what you said, Charlotte, I think in terms of our own responsibility in what we eat and choosing what we eat, I totally agree. I think when you do have the chance, then do it. But I think also there is, when it comes to circular economy and when it comes also to diet with regards to that. So putting a little bit more focus on healthy food, on vegetarian food, on vegan food, for example, then I think it's also a question, at least for me, or for a change of mindset. Because when you just mentioned hamburgers, do we really eat hamburgers because we love the taste of it, or because it's marketing and it's, it's kind of a trend, at least it has been. And now the trend goes into a different area and it's more towards a sustainable marketing. I think we can see quite a lot of that. And maybe that's also kind of a chance if we really, truly focus on it and make it happen in more areas, I would say.
But I think there's a point to be made there, and that is that if we're looking at least in I'm mostly familiar with the Danish market developments, and prices for meat have definitely not followed inflation levels. So comparatively, we can purchase astronomical amounts of meat that would not be purchasable for a normal family household just 30 or 40 years ago. So we have also pushed those prices down quite a lot. So I think there's 2 parts to it. One is that it's of course cultured, but the other one is that it's cheap and tasty. And the fact that it's cheap is only reflected through actual legislation. So this is an area where actively subsidizing and incentivizing the production of something that is incredibly emitting. We're also heavily subsidizing the fossil fuel and extraction industry, mind you. On a global level, we're investing annually the same amount of money that's being estimated to be needed as a one-time investment to reach the Paris Agreement. So we do subsidize on a global level both extraction and fossil fuel industry, and those are some of the political means that I believe we should start to address. That being said, I think that the unemployment agenda is still somewhat untouched. We're also getting some questions from the audience around nuclear energy. My personal opinion on nuclear is that it's a great technology, but it's also very slow in development. It's expensive to deploy. It's great when we have it. We shouldn't shut it down. The new developments of thorium reactors, etc., I've seen incredibly slow deployment rates, and then they're not competitive towards solar and wind. So that'll be my 10 cents, but I'll leave the floor to the rest of the panelists. But first off, Riccardo, you did the good old raising your actual hand. So I'll pass the floor to you, please.
All right, thanks. Yes, well, I would like to tell you a bit more about the fictional world that I have in mind, and I quote Heiner about that. And I see that, unfortunately, the old slogan that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism is still holding true. But luckily, I was born after the fall of the USSR, so I don't carry the burden on my shoulders, and I feel that we can invent something that goes beyond Eastern Germany and that goes beyond the current system we have. And if we want to take some historical precedent, I think we should later look at the mixed economy that we had in the post-war period, because I don't know about Germany, but the country I'm from, Italy, all the public infrastructures were built collectively, were built by the state. The highway system, the energy system, the train system, the sewage system, everything was built as a public endeavor, because all these infrastructures are a public good, and so should be about green infrastructure. So let me repeat, I don't think that market prices don't have a role to play. I just think they have a marginal role to play, because I cannot quite understand how you can simply increase taxation on fossil fuels and hoping that the entire economy, the anarchy of the market, will restructure it in a way that we could pursue some sustainable and fair objectives. My question would be, how do you price Richard Branson out of going to space? How do you price carbon so high that will deter this kind of foolish pursuits without at the same time impacting the quality of life of people, as we saw in France with the Gilets jaunes protests? This is a simple question of not having some sort of green Maoism, but rather of thinking what are the public goods that we need as a society and what are the foolish pursuits that we should forbid. So I don't think that in times of a climate collapse in which vast parts of Northern America are burning, prohibiting people from going to Spain to take a plane to Spain for a weekend trip, I don't think it's green Maoism. I think it's just common sense. And I believe that neither Germany nor other European country lived under dictatorship in times of COVID. We simply were faced with an emergency that was jeopardizing the lives of people and the ability of our society, of our civilization to keep together. And we adopted certain measures that indeed entailed a certain curtailment of private freedom, but unless we expose such a sanguine liberal view for which everything is allowed to people as long as they can pay for it, I think that we can agree that we can have the pursuit of certain democratic goals, even in the context of the need of demobilizing, scaling down certain activities. So these are just a few thoughts I wanted to share with you.
And Riccardo, before I give the floor back to Charlotte, do you have any thoughts on nuclear? It seems like that's very much on the mind of the audience.
I actually agree with what you said. I think that it looks very good on paper, but then when you look at the costs and the building times. I think that there are some very interesting estimates put forward by Kevin Anderson, the famous British climate scientist, in which he proves that in order to make nuclear a substantial energy source in the near future, we would need to build an humongous number of power plants, of nuclear power plants in a very short time, with I think all the issues that we know very well are connected with nuclear. So I think it can play a very marginal role in the transition, and it's seen as a silver bullet, which I think neglects a more holistic aspect, not least also the democratic aspect, because since we discuss also about democracy, I don't see what is democratic about nuclear energy. I think we should also interrogate ourselves on the fact that a certain kind of civilizational development based on such concentrated high-tech energy will always and inevitably be undemocratic, unless, of course, we think that voting every 5 years is the alpha and the omega of democracy. If we think instead in terms of greater participation and the ownership of local communities of energy production, just like food productions and many others, I think nuclear should not be in the cards.
Thanks a lot, Riccardo, and thanks for bringing us back on the democratic track in here. Charlotte, you and I are both from countries where we have shared utilities and have a big movement for shared ownership also in the private sector. Please share what's on your mind, and if you have an angle on nuclear, then I'd also be curious to hear. I grew up with sort of almost war chants of what needs to go away, the nuclear plant in Barsebäck, which is just across the pond from where I grew up in Denmark. Anyway, Charlotte, please share your thoughts.
I'm from the other side, so I'm from next to Barsebäck, basically. But I actually want to make a comment, building on some other points Riccardo's, around the public goods and the importance of the government also being a lead figure for that green economy. Procurement. A government of any country spends a lot of money buying a lot of different stuff. Services, products, not just innovation and fancy stuff that will help change our world. Pens, hospitals, they're quite cool. But all of these things, there's different awards, and there's in these awards of the contracts, and in the contracts we need to build in better ways to include environmental and social criteria, because at that moment, yes, there's some good developments in the EU, some new guidance on how to procure more socially responsibly and from social enterprises. And I know the UK got a Social Value Act, and which is for central government, which is £49 billion. And they're putting some new social criteria into their procurement. So into everything they buy that needs to be assessed from a social and a tiny bit of environmental criteria as well. But that should just be so mainstream. Why isn't it now? Why are public contracts so often being won on only price and very little attention to the other ones? So just emphasizing the importance of public, but also public procurement.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for bringing that back on the table, Charlotte. It's also something that that is being discussed in quite a lot of fora in terms of where is that responsibility, and I think that also goes back to the privilege we were discussing about having access. And I think one way of pricing could be something that is just not a linear tax model, right? So right now we have in most countries we have the same VAT, depending disregarding your household income or your personal income, meaning that buying a vegetable is infinitely much more expensive the lower your income compared to someone who has a lot of money. And that maybe doesn't make so much sense when we are also from the public side of things in most of Europe also financing a lot of the consequences of an unhealthy diet. So maybe we could also look at some of these schemes and make it more profitable and more accessible to actually eat healthy and also do something that is less harmful to the environment, like not allowing that the price to take the plane is the same as taking the train. I think there's quite a lot of tools that could come in handy, and for the super wealthy, they pay a lot with their time and much less with their wallets, and that's definitely something that I think will be a huge influence for the future, that we're going to see that the rich part of the population does not care so much about the actual price. They care about their time, and that means that if we're looking at it from a democratic angle, we also need to put a price on time, because that if we do agree on the basic principle that there's an intrinsic value to a human life, there's also an intrinsic value to every single minute that we dedicate to some activities. So I think that's an interesting and incredibly complex and abstract matter to go into. Heiner, before I give the floor to you, we have a question from the audience, which is someone who's asking, how do you suggest that we can be pricing the external costs of meat production? So the negative externalities that are associated to meat production. How are we going to deal with it? And I'll pass the floor to you, Heiner.
Well, answering this question is all about prices again. We have to allow the real price, so to say, that has to be paid by the human society, and that price is much higher, and then obviously consumption will change. But I wanted to make two remarks on what Riccardo said. Well, it's not about a mixed economy, Riccardo. It's what you said before. Now you changed a bit your tone, but what you said before was not sounding like a mixed economy. We in Germany also had mixed economies. Mixed economies are not able to steer the whole economy in a way that you think. But I don't want to go into that further. But a very bad example is Corona. Corona policies are a very bad example for and should not be a model for environmental policies, because that was a shock to the economy that cannot be repeated 2 or 3 times. And the main reason is, again, unemployment. Unemployment shot up in all our economies, and I can tell you, our politicians were absolutely shocked by the drop of GDP and the rise in unemployment. And so you cannot repeat that time and again, say every second year, have an environmental shock where unemployment goes up by 1 million people or so. You will never get any step forward in terms of, as I said, at least keeping the standard of living of the people. And if you're not able to keep at least the standard of living for the majority of the people, you will never be elected. And all the other things you say mean, if it not means unemployment, then it means reduction of income. Reduction of income is a concept that will never be sold in democracies. That is extremely difficult. And you have to think hard about what could be an argument for a politician to say, people, we're living on Earth, but you have to vote me here in my town or in my country. But I tell you, to stop the problems on the Earth, you have to reduce your income, without knowing what the others do, without having the compliance or even the willingness and the declared willingness of all countries in the world to do that exactly at the same time, because then only it would make sense. How do you get that? How do you get there? I tell you, never. You will never get there, because that is democratically absolutely impossible. So that is what we have to talk about. I cannot repeat myself, but time is anyway over. I can again only wish you good luck with all your ideas, but I think they're not to be realized in the near future.
And in order for us to not end on such a low note, I believe, Charlotte, you raised your hand just before. So I'll give you the final remarks, and then hopefully for us in the room that are still young, and have not allowed entirely to see the world that we're going to pass go to shit. Let's see if we can actually manage that high note. And thanks a lot for your contribution, Heiner.
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah, I guess I feel like a lot of responsibility right now. I just wanted to give.
No, I put it on you.
It's like I'll see if I start trembling, but I just thought it was such a good question around the price, external cost of meat, how to price it. I don't have the whole economics answer to that, but one thing we could do is to change the way we ask companies to respond to their shareholders, to actually respond to their stakeholders. So if I have a meat producing company, I would be responding to all those affected about this by my business. And if that was who I was responding to, and that was who I was being held accountable to, so that includes society, workers, neighbors, the environment, but obviously people representing the environment, then we could actually make some different decisions, and that could help us actually get the true cost in there as well, because we'll be also having more transparency of what's the real externalities. But like, beautiful last words, I obviously leave over to you, but it's been a fantastic discussion and really, really insightful, and thank you.
Yeah, and thanks a lot. And I'd also like to pass out a huge thank you to all of you. This has felt a lot like having a highly intellectual political dinner conversation with a group of friends. So thank you for making me feel comfortable also as a moderator. Thank you all for sharing your insights. I feel like I learned a lot. So I hope that is also the mutual experience from everyone in the audience, and also for you as panelists. I hope that you will engage, you will connect on LinkedIn or on whichever social media you're on, in order to share these ideas and keep developing it further, and also emphasizing those voices. And I think to summarize where we've been, we need to recognize the true cost of things. That is one of the ways that we can transition towards more of a circular economy. It also means that we will have to look at access or ownership. We also have a huge motion for democratization, and also looking at the individual rights on a global level, as a lot of these rights and a lot of the consequences from the actions are actually transitioning borders. So that responsibility needs to be taken. And then there's also a motion here from Charlotte to go into what we could call corporate democracy. So exercise your rights as a shareholder. Since those corporates are actual juridical entities, they also have ways of governance that can be influenced by us as voters and by us as citizens. However, it's also an inaccessible market that not everyone has access to. But for us that actually have the privilege to own pension, to own stock in various companies, showing up for the general assemblies and holding them accountable as shareholders is another tool in the democratic, so to speak, or neo-democratic toolkit that can be deployed. Last but not least, we were talking about the entire primary sector and how we can look at alternate ways of looking at that, and how we can create value in a more holistic sense. I hope I didn't forget anything too much. We are definitely out of time, and I just want to pass a sincere thank you to all of you, and wish you the best of luck for the elections coming up in Germany, Rebecca, and best of luck to the entire Volt concept. Thank you very much for your attention and participation in this debate. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.